Some people think that, I don't know if this is how confirmed this is, but some people believe that Liv is actually living in Stu's house.
Ooh. That's a good catch on the surnames. I mean, the surname talk kind of leads us to, well, I suppose we could get on to yours, TCG, because the
Oh
surnames are
god.
quite important to yours.
Strap up, guys. You're in for a bumpy ride.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
excited.
Because do I have a theory for you?
All right, let me get
Right.
this teed up because you have
Bring it up.
outdone yourself.
Yeah, I've got a presentation and shit.
You all warmed up? You ready to go?
I'm all good to go. Let's do this.
All right, baby, let's do this. In the shoulder.
Ladies and gentlemen, 2022, Scream. I'm going to tell you why
no.
Stu Macher is actually Scream 22's killer. And I'm also going to have a stab, okay, at what the actual meta-analysis will be in this actual film. So, want to go to the next slide?
Heck yeah.
So, why Stu will return. So basically, I'm going to give you 3 reasons as to why I think the time now is right for Stu Macher to return. So the reasons, first of all, I don't believe that he actually died in the first film. The second reason was that he was always meant to return to the Scream franchise. And also, him returning now would tie into the latest film's meta-analysis. So we'll essentially we'll go over those points in more detail now.
Please.
I can see this happening. This is very somehow Palpatine returned
Yes.
energy,
No one's
right?
ever really
Yeah.
on.
So
No
let's
one's ever really beyond.
keep that. It's really interesting that you said that. Keep that thought. All right, we will get to that. So the first part, obviously, Stu never died in the first film. So next slide. So first, let's explain why he isn't actually dead. Okay. So one of the rules that Randy laid out of horror films is that the killer will always come back for one last scare.
Careful. This is the moment when the supposedly dead killer comes back to life for one last scare.
However, despite him having a TV dropped on his head and being electrocuted, Billy was the only one who actually got his comeback moment. Stu, on the other hand, didn't. So Stu actually hasn't had that second coming, as so to speak. So technically, this is in violation of the very rules set out by the actual film itself. Either it was an oversight or it was intentional. But I know that it was intentional, and I would like to submit the reason why.
Here goes.
Stu was always meant to return to the Scream franchise. So when you take a look at this image on the right, what do you see?
Portia de Rossi's original nose.
You do, yes. But in the background, if you look at the background, there's a blonde geezer with a pair of sunglasses on. That man is Matthew Lillard, aka Stu Macher. He actually returned to Scream 2 as an extra in the background during the party scene where Sydney meets up with the 2 frat girls. Now, obviously, this isn't Stu, so this isn't really an argument to suggest that Stu was alive that Stu was around the college campuses at the time. But what it does demonstrate is that Kevin Williamson wasn't afraid to bring back dead characters, even if it was just for a laugh. However, what I wanted to bring attention was that in early drafts of the third Scream movie, because just to sort of lay out, the Scream films were always meant to be a trilogy. So Kevin Williamson always sort of had 3 films in mind. And in early drafts of the third version, Stu was originally meant to return. Essentially, he would be in prison. He was alive, but he was in prison. But essentially, he had built up a cult following. And the murders, essentially he led an army, if you will, of ghost faces who would then carry out murders in various high schools. However, due to real world events, i.e. Shooty 1999, 2 teenagers, I won't say it because of Susan, essentially that idea got scrapped. Stu was, and Matthew Lillard has spoken openly about this in the years since, about how he was, meant to return and how he would always be open to return as Stu.
He was even paid for it.
He was even paid for it,
in
yeah.
advance.
Yeah, he was still paid, even though that never ended up happening. But one thing that interested me about the words that Stu used in the first film, he actually said this to Sid in the first movie.
You see, Sid, everybody dies but us. Everybody dies but us.
That is pretty.
We're going to
chilling.
carry on and plan the sequel.
Because let's face it, baby, these days, you gotta have a sequel.
Just want to stop there. You know that if this film does well, there will be another sequel. Blumhouse have essentially agreed to 2 films. So in terms of what the meta-analysis of this film is, I believe it comes down to, next slide, fan service in modern day films.
You did say the posters would be relevant.
Yeah. So I mean, in terms of what we know about the Scream movie, so what do we know about this film? So 1, it's set in Woodsboro. 2, the main characters from the previous movies are returning, and 3, now one of the things that I noticed when listening to the trailer was that they actually said the words, the attacks were all on people related to the original killers. Very interesting wording, that. We also know that this movie isn't a remake, but it is a direct sequel, and this is where this is where I sort of disagreed that the 2011 would get retconned and not necessarily forgotten about, but just it probably won't be referenced as much as, say, the first film. So if Stu is indeed the killer, it would make sense that he would carry out the killings in Woodsboro, not only for the historical links there, but he would also be familiar with his town. We also know that the main 3, obviously Sydney, Dewey and Gail, obviously we've got Hicks as well, but she's not the main 3, are returning. But they have established that there is a connection from the old characters that we already know, and a new as well as the new characters in this film. But I don't think that connection is perhaps the overarching theme of this film. And the reason why I think that is because they already did that in Scream 4. You had a new generation of young blood come in, and they already brought the old generation back, and they've already done that. So I think there's a different thing going on here. And I believe this old and new connection is to solidify the connection not to the protagonist, but actually the antagonist. And I say antagonist because I believe there's only one killer in this film. And what makes me think that is the way that the attacks is the method of which the attacks are being carried out. They're not being linked to the victims of the original Woodsboro murders, but the original killers.
I like it. I like it.
Each character,
as you say, it's going off. It's not repeating what they've done before, but it is having to do a fresh angle. Okay.
Yeah. Each character as well. Each new character is going to have a link to the original film. Okay. So I mean, Charity, you've already pointed out Liv McKenzie.
I don't know if anyone's seen this or not, but in the part of the film where the parents come home to find Casey, he turns to the mother and says, drive down to the Mackenzies. One of the, I mean, people probably already know this, but one of the characters in this film is called Liv McKenzie, so that's obviously going to be.
Oh, what a catch!
See, I did say that. Mm-hmm. Very clever.
For a start, and that was something that I didn't pick up on, but that's a really good. That was one example. Another example as well is that 2 of the characters have the surname Meeks Martin. Now I believe that these are likely the children of Randy's sister, Martha Meeks. Obviously, Randy Meeks, big part of the first film. Yeah. And typically, when a sequel carries the name of its first installment, it's because there's some form of retcon or remake taking place. And I think we already mentioned Halloween as an example, but of course there was Friday the 13th back in 2009. They're not direct sequels, but they are sort of reboots or retcons of previous sequels. Halloween did that by removing Josh Hartnett as Laurie Strode's son and giving her a daughter instead, and they also removed the brother-sister connection between Michael and Laurie as well. But that's not the case here. This is a direct sequel, a genuine sequel to the previous 4 films. That's where I'm at. I think it's going to be I think the meta-analysis though will be fan service to will be a critique on fan service on modern day horror films. I believe that although Stu will come back, I don't believe he is going to be the same character. Think Luke Skywalker, for example, in Return of the Jedi. I do believe that when Stu does come back, he is not going to be the hyperactive, insane teenager, but I do think he's going to be a bitter, broken man. Just simply out for revenge. Because essentially, I mean, he wasn't... He was always pitted as the other guy. Roman, essentially, in Scream 3, revealed his motives for doing what he did. You know, he mentioned that he managed to recruit Billy, and he advised Billy to get another guy. And Stu was also visibly surprised when Billy started exposition dumping on Sydney about the affair that his father had with Maureen, and his motives as to why he killed Maureen. You know, he looked like, oh, hold on a minute, you know, he was just doing it because, you know, he was pressured into doing it. I mean, he says so himself. Why was he doing it? Peer pressure. He's sensitive. Well, I think that character, that demeanor will have been gone after 25 years. And again, I go back to what we said in like slide 8. Everybody dies but us. And this is why I think Dewey and Gale are going to die, because I think even though you could say that line was a throwaway line in the first film, when obviously it's Billy and Stu, again, we know that this film is a meta-analysis. We know that they know that fans really like to deep dive these films. I really think that bit of dialogue from Stu is going to carry some weight in this film. I believe that Sydney will be the sole survivor. I believe that Stu will survive. And I believe that the sequel, like Halloween Kills, will be a direct sequel, maybe the next day, if not the same night at the end of Scream. If I'm wrong, I will be very disappointed.
Well, you know what? There's more stuff in favour of that, actually. So they, as you say, Scream 3, there were...
But wait!
Bringing him back.
There's more!